of climate change. This woman has lost her home.
Where will I live now? We're tearing down the house I first came to 30 years ago when I got married. I gave birth to my 4 children there. My 2 daughters got married there. It just breaks my heart.
The extreme conditions people here face may soon affect us all.
Six kilometers from here, we had 2 hectares of land. The sea gobbled them up.
Most Bangladeshi climate refugees move to the mega city of Dhaka, the country's capital. An estimated 2,000 people arrive in Dhaka every day. During monsoon season, the number rises to 4,000 a day. The world's second largest river delta is located on the Bay of Bengal. 2 large rivers flow through the country from north to south, the Brahmaputra and the Ganges. Much of the land in Bangladesh is flat, and its numerous rivers often burst their banks. The country is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, a real danger for its 160 million people.
There are a number of factors involved in the impacts of human-induced climate change on the river systems and the water systems. Firstly, the glacier ice melt in the Himalayas. The second impact is on flooding. We will have greater amounts and intensities of rainfall during the monsoon, which will cause more flooding. We are already seeing that our what used to be a 1 in 20-year flood has now effectively become a 1 in 5-year flood. So the magnitude of floods has increased already and will increase even more with human-induced climate change. And the third factor are cyclones that come from the Bay of Bengal in the south. Those are going to become more intense, and we are going to have to deal with higher intensity cyclones.
Even now, at the beginning of monsoon season, the Brahmaputra is 9 kilometers wide at some points. It's filled with melted snow from the Himalayas, another effect of climate change. In future, other rivers around the world may experience similar increases in water volume. This is where the Brahmaputra merges with the Ganges to become the Padma. When these rivers flood, it can have a devastating effect on nearby communities, as here in the village of Harirampur.
Here on the left, the Padma River destroyed everything in just 3 days. On the right, everything was gone in 4 days. The river has covered an area of 61 hectares in our village. 300 families lost their homes because of the extreme river erosion.
I'm really scared. Our house may be gone soon.
11-year-old Mahfouz Hussain walks past an area that used to be a garden. The local residents are preparing to move inland to escape the rising water. One of Mahfouz's neighbors says he's not going to let the river take this tree. Mahfouz's house is 50 yards from the danger zone. But the situation here could become worse when monsoon season starts. This used to be the center of the village. Now it looks like a battlefield. You can still see the remains of several houses. This fragile sapling has become a symbol for the villagers as floods caused by climate change consume the ground beneath their feet. Until yesterday, Momtaj Begum lived in this house with several members of her family, including her son, his wife, and their child.
I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm worried that I'm going to drown in the floodwaters.
The house was the family's pride and joy. Momtaj's son and some workers are salvaging everything they can from the structure.
Where will I live now? My house is gone. I'll have to rely on the kindness of others.
I'm going to have to move to Dhaka and find a job so I can afford to come back here, buy some land and rebuild my parents' home.
The river flooded the Begum family's farmland 2 years ago. Momtaj's husband and her oldest son left to take construction jobs in the United Arab Emirates. The younger son, Selim, has now also become a climate refugee in his own country.
I'm so sad. My father built this house and now I have to tear it down. That really hurts.
Momtaj Begum is saying a prayer.
Where does all this water come from?
The Ganges flows the longest from the Himalayan mountains into India for about 2,000 kilometers before it comes to Bangladesh. Much of the water is taken away upstream in India by a series of dams, the biggest being the Farakka Dam just outside the border of Bangladesh. As a result, Bangladesh is not receiving as much water as it used to in the dry season. The problem is in the monsoon season, they open up all the water, they let it come through Bangladesh, but during the dry season, they take the water away and divert it away from Bangladesh, and we don't get enough water. So we have floods in the monsoon period, and we have too little water in the dry season.
The lives of these people have been severely disrupted by the effects of climate change and the water resource policies of a neighboring country. Bangladeshis are left with few options but to try to protect themselves. Selim and the others transport the walls and roof of the house deep into the forest. He hopes to return to the village one day. He hopes that the job he finds in Dhaka will earn him enough money to buy some land here. Many in the village have similar plans. No one here actually wants to go to the capital, but they believe they have no other choice. From the Manikganj region, we move southwest to the Poshur River, which flows through the Sundarbans region. Sundarbans means beautiful forest in Bengali. The area covers 10,000 square kilometers, most of it in Bangladesh. And it's home to the world's largest mangrove forest region. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Well, Sundarbans is actually seen as the lungs of Bangladesh. It absorbs all the pollution for us.
The Sundarbans protects Bangladesh. And if we lose that protection, then the country loses its protection.
The Sundarbans forest helps to protect millions of people from floods that are caused by cyclones. It also offers a rich habitat for wildlife, including the endangered Bengal tiger. The region is the country's largest source of forest-based raw materials, but its future is under threat.
The Sundarbans is dying in front of our eyes due to saline intrusion and impacts of climate change.
Because the Bay of Bengal is slowly rising, salt water is getting into the freshwater channels of the Sundarbans. And there's another environmental threat. The government plans to build a coal-fired power plant in the region.
Very thoroughly and detailed study of that so that it will not harm much to the environments. And this is not so many actually. 2, 3, 4 power plants. That means we have planned within 2040, 30% of the power plant will be from the coal, but it will be a clean coal energy.
Many are against the power plant, which is a joint venture between public sector power agencies in Bangladesh and India. India will build the plant, located near Rampal, under the supervision of a German company. Once construction is completed, India would also operate the facility. UNESCO has asked the government to provide an environmental impact study on the project.
It is a completely disastrous decision to build a coal-fired power plant so close to the forest, and all environmental indications indicate that it will bring disastrous consequences for the survival of the forest and in general for the environment.
We have, in fact, from Save the Sundarbans Committee, produced 17 reports from various aspects, that what will be the effect of Rampal coal plant on flora and fauna, on the Sundarbans itself, on the water, the river erosion, about the dredging problem and everything, which shows very scientifically that it's definitely going to harm Sundarbans.
India will supply the coal that the plant will burn. The Poshur River is to be dredged nearby to make room for the transport ships. Environmental experts say the dredging operation will contribute to river erosion. This is the Poshur River, about 90 kilometers above the point where it empties into the Bay of Bengal. There are numerous fishing villages along the riverbanks. The Christian minority in this village have put up a cross. People have to walk carefully through the mud so they don't fall.
The main entrance to our old church was over there. We built a new one, but the river took it too.
– 15 days ago, I lost my house again to river erosion. It was on this side, where the Poshur River is now. My house was next to that church entrance.
The effects of climate change often hit the poorest of the poor the hardest. Swapna Khan is raising a teenaged son, and her husband is ill. After the last flood, a neighbor allowed her to build a small dwelling on his property. She used materials from what was left of her house. Solar energy panels are common here, in a village that has been ravaged by the effects of climate change.
My son sleeps back there, and I sleep here in the front. This is all we have.
Swapna harvests river shrimp and sells them in the hut they sleep in. Her son attends a local school. She wants him to have a better life.
I can't read or write, so I don't have a lot of options. I was born here and I don't want to live anywhere else. I can earn a little money here, just enough to get by.
Swapna also owns a few sheep. She calls them her life insurance policy. She can sell the sheep to pay for her son's education. But for now, she's concerned about the river, which is moving closer to her home. Swapna's elderly neighbor is also worried about the rising water.
I told my son that when I die, he should put my body in the river because there's no land left to bury me.
We travel from the village of Bangankul to Chenakabunya. The scenes of devastation are almost identical.
This is the grave of my grandfather, Muna Basar. If we could find some land, I could take the grave with me and rebuild it.
Then Roni Basar climbs a coconut tree to get some of its fruit before the river washes those away too. Nothing here is safe from the rising water, not even the graves of the dead. A similar scene in the next village. 8 people live here. The family of Shushanto Kumar Mondol, who earns a living as a fisherman. His wife, Rupa Bachar, says they've had to rebuild their house 3 times.
A lot of our neighbours have gone to Dhaka to work in the textile factories, and there are fewer fish in the river.
Shushanto and his son fish in the Shundarbans, just like his father before him. Now Shushanto fears that the coal-fired power plant will pollute the water here.
If we don't catch enough fish, I'll have to take a job as a day laborer. I can't move my entire family to the city.
From the Shundarbans, we now move east to Bola, the largest island in Bangladesh. Fortified dikes were built along the Meghna River after the last round of floods. The dikes were built too late to help Mohammed Mostafa Maji. His village was washed away by the river 3 years ago. Because he couldn't farm anymore, he turned to fishing.
There was a mosque here, a school, and some houses. But because of river erosion and flooding, we had to move to another village, Elisha. More than a hectare of my land is underwater here.
The village of Elisha is now protected by the dike, but only a few of the 2,000 residents of Mohammed's old village have been able to find a new home. Mohammed says he was lucky because a local resident rented him some land and he built a new house there. He lives here with his wife, one of his 3 sons, his daughter-in-law, and a grandchild. His son, Abu Taher, helps his father on the fishing boat. The family can't grow their own vegetables anymore, so they have to buy them. This is Mohammed's daughter-in-law and his grandchild.
I've had to move 3 times because of river erosion. If it happens again, we'll all have to go to Dhaka.
My 2 brothers already live there. We had no money to pay for my younger brother's education.
"20 kilometers upstream, we find another village ravaged by floodwaters. The dike burst here 4 days ago.
It was the day of the Muslim feast of the sacrifice. The river carried away everything we owned. There was a cyclone and a lot of rain. The wind flattened my home. I still come to the river every day. I was terrified, and I can still feel it in my bones. The river has taken everything. I don't know how to survive this."
The farmer Mohammed Nurul Alam lives in the village of Dorirampur.
We had a lot of fields scattered around the village, almost a whole hectare of land.
Only this rice field remains, but the water no longer drains off. The authorities have built a new dike here and a storm shelter, but the shelter is dangerously close to the riverbank. And the dike has cut off Mohammed's village from the rest of the region.
Look at this rice. The roots are rotting. I have no idea what to do now. Should I move? Allah help me and show me the way.
The local residents fear that the Meghna River will soon wash away everything. This is what's left of Mohammed's house. His young family and parents now sleep in temporary accommodations. There's an old saying in Bangladesh, "Water is the mother of our country." But Mohammed believes that is no longer the case.
Water used to mean life to me, but now it means death.
Flooding is not new in the flat country Bangladesh. It was once welcomed. The rivers deposit alluvial soil throughout the Delta region, and this creates some of the country's best farmland.
But nowadays, from 80s to 70s, the huge changes is happening because of the monsoon season, because of the cyclones, because of the seawater rise, and because of the high speed of the wind. You know the velocity of the Padma River's course. It is 10 times higher than the German River Rhine. So speed of the water is very high. 2 million cubic feet per second water speed, then it is creating the river erosion. Although these people are very innocent victim of the climate change, because they are emitting only 3 kgs of carbon annually. But compared to developed countries people emitting not less than 15 to 20 tons of carbon.
Due to the sea level rise, which the beginning to happen and which will happen in a major way in Bangladesh beyond 2050, according to the IPCC's report, Bangladesh will lose anything between 17 to 20% of its current land mass. A 20% land loss to the sea due to sea level rise will cause at least 25 to 30 million people to be displaced within the country. So we are going to create the largest refugee population due to climate change in one single country.
This school, which has 2,000 pupils, is threatened by the rising river even now. The primary school has already been shut down. The remaining rooms are now overcrowded.
But the loss of livelihoods of the population will be much larger. We're talking about 20 to 30% of the population of the country that will be badly affected, those living in the coastal areas, in the low-lying coastal areas. And eventually they will have to move. So they are the potential future climate migrants, and that clearly they are undoubtedly climate migrants.
These fortified cement blocks that make up the dike near the village of Elisha are being undermined by the river that flows past. At least one of the blocks falls into the water every day.
The blocks aren't holding, so this area will be flooded too. It's dangerous for all of us.
Hardly a day passes when Mohammed Mostafa Majid does not see ships full of people headed for Dhaka.
Every day, there are more than 200 slums in Dhaka are receiving more and more what one might call environmental refugees or even climate change refugees coming from other parts of the country to Dhaka city.
Dhaka has now come to a size of 20 million people without the adequate infrastructure.
On the outskirts of the city, factory waste and garbage lay dumped on the streets. Salutin is Mohammed Mostafa Majid's 26-year-old son. He now lives in a slum that's located near the textile factory where he works. The textile workers share this public bath.
If my parents' land hadn't been flooded, I'd still be in the village going to school. We had to move 3 or 4 times because of flooding. My parents finally ran out of money. That's why I had to come to Dhaka. First, I worked in a shop, but it didn't pay much. That's why I switched to the textile factory.
Salutin, his wife and child live in this small apartment.
Life in the village was good. I went to school and lived in my parents' house. I won't see that kind of life ever again. There's no work in Bola.